Hey everybody, this is JDGaming, back with another episode of Simple Sample. Today's second episode is extra special, not only because it's the official continuation of this brand new series for the channel, but because the theme we're covering has some extra meaning for me. As I mentioned in the debut episode, my partner recently started playing Master Duel, which was her first real Yu-Gi-Oh experience after some light dabbling in the GX anime and some speed duels. We wanted to find a deck for her that was both simple to pick up and reasonably strong. Plus, there was a special request that the characters be cute. After sifting through some solid candidates, she decided on Marincess. It was a deck that I myself had only ever played against, but I would quickly learn is a fun one-card combo deck reminiscent in some ways to the twins. With that, I happily bring you a simple sample deck list for Marincess. First off, friendly reminder that this is a sample deck list, and so you're going to want to go ahead and change this to however you would like to play in the environment you find yourself in. That is very much encouraged, and it's probably something you have to do realistically with any deck you find online. With that said, this particular build was made for Master Duel because that was the format we were intending to play it in, but I'll go ahead and give a ton of different options that you can consider so that whether you play it in Master Duel like we did, or you want to play it in TCG, you'll have some ideas, and then by the end of this video, I think you'll have enough of an understanding of Marincess, even if it's a totally new strategy for you, that you'll be able to go in and think of some new ideas for yourself as well. But this simple sample is going to start off, like any other deck, with a look at the goal, because the first step in building any deck is to establish the theme and build a core that supports the theme's goals. We are looking here at a deck that summons one card link ones and then further extends that into big plays upward in a few different directions. That means we need to get a level 4 or lower Marincess monster on the field so we can either summon Blue Slug or Sea Angel, usually in that order. When you summon either of these, they have trigger effects. Blue Slug will recycle a Marincess monster other than itself from your grave to your hand, and Sea Angel is going to be able to search a Marincess spell card from your deck to your hand. Each of those is a hard once per turn, and Blue Slug in particular is one of a handful of cards in this theme that does lock you into water monsters for the rest of the turn. Depending on how fancy you want to get with the technicals of this deck, you could go ahead and just assume you're always locked into water, though sometimes there may be some slight advantages if you realize, wait, I'm not locked in here. With that main goal out of the way, we can go ahead and start off with the main deck here with 3 copies of Marincess Blue Tang. On summon, she has a Foolish Burial effect for any Marincess monster except Tang, and her second effect is on link summon of a water monster using her as a material. You can Pot of Duality for a Marincess card from the top of your deck. Each of those is a hard once per turn, and the main monster you want to send to the grave off of Blue Tang's summon is either a copy of Seahorse or Mandarin in most situations because they have some kind of summoning effect. Seahorse says if this card is in your hand, you can special summon it to a zone a link monster points to, which is just like a World Legacy, Crusadia, or some kind of free link extender. And she also has an effect for follow-up turns where you can banish her from the graveyard to special summon one water monster. Each of these effects, even the summoning condition from your hand, is a hard once per turn. Mandarin straight up says you can summon her from your hand or graveyard if you control 2 Marincess monsters and one of them at least points into an open zone. It does get banished if it leaves the field, but you're not really too worried about that. Both of these are prime choices, especially because the way Tang and Seahorse interact, you summon Tang, send Seahorse to grave, summon your Blue Slug. Blue Slug will activate to recycle your Seahorse, who now has an open zone that Blue Slug is pointing to. So that's the basic idea. You can also go ahead and, later in the turn summon Mandarin, because a lot of times with 3 copies of Seahorse and some ways to search things, you will end up with Seahorse in your hand anyway. And even if you just normal summon Seahorse to start, you can go ahead and summon Blue Slug, recycle that same Seahorse, summon her back for free, and you can summon a Sea Angel under that as well. The next important main deck monster is Marincess Spring Girl, who has an effect that lets you banish a Marincess in your grave for cost in order to special summon her from your hand, and a second effect that's also a trigger just like Tang. If it's used as link material for a water monster, you can go ahead and count up how many Marincess monsters you control at resolution, mill that many cards from the top of your deck to the graveyard, and then you do 200 damage to your opponent for each Marincess card you send with this effect. The reason it's powerful, just like Tang's trigger effect when she's sent to the graveyard, is the fact that these are optional triggers that have the same activation timing as both Blue Slug and Sea Angel. What that means is because in Yu-Gi-Oh! Simultaneous effects go on chain with each other, you can go ahead and activate Blue Slug or Sea Angel as Chain Link 1, then choose your Blue Tang or Spring Girl, whichever is appropriate, as Chain Link 2, and that will protect you from effects like Ash Blossom or Ghost Bell that would have to directly respond to your card in order to negate you. It doesn't stop everything, like of course Imperm, Veiler, those kinds of things will still be able to stop your Link monster, but even reducing the efficacy of something like Ash Blossom against your deck is a pretty solid reason to play this kind of a resilient Link 1 card combo. Do note another possible playline is you can summon Tang, send Spring Girl to the grave, and then once you go ahead and use Blue Tang to summon Slug, Slug can just recycle that Spring Girl, who can then banish Tang to summon herself out as a different name if you so choose, and that lets you go and use Blue Tang to protect your Slug, then use Spring Girl to summon out Angel and protect Angel's search effect as well. So you can chain block both of your Link 1 monsters. Before we jump into the spells, we want to just finish off these last couple of monsters in the main deck. They are Marincess Pascalis, which is basically an on-summon tin goldfish or goblin bird, kind of cheat out another Marincess monster from your hand effect. And then Pascalis actually has a similar follow-up effect to Seahorse, where you can banish her from the graveyard in order to recover a Marincess spell or trap in your grave back to your hand. Card once per turn on both those effects. And Marincess Sleepy Maiden's a little different in that she's level 5, so you can't use her as link material for one of the Link 1s, but she does have an extender ability where she can target one Marincess card you control, summon herself to the field, then while Sleepy Maiden remains on the field, that card you originally targeted for the summon cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. Very handy if you want to protect your field spell, as we'll get to in just a moment. And then Sleepy Maiden also has a follow-up effect, but you can use it in the same turn she's sent to the grave if you so choose. Target a Marincess Link monster you control and equip it with one Marincess Link monster from your graveyard, which is relevant with the field spell Battle Ocean. This is a one of brick that you don't have to necessarily play. Some people seem to place less value on this card because it's kind of a flawed way that you can get a Towers-like monster, but we decided to play it because it does win a lot of games on its own, and it is quite a lot of fun that the deck is able to do. To water this card down in a very simple way, it provides 2,000 extra attack to a Marincess Link monster you summon to the extra monster zone specifically, and if you happen to summon it using Marincess Crystal Heart as a material, which we decided to include because it's pretty easy to do, that Link monster is also unaffected by your opponent's card effects. The way it gets the power boost is it basically equips up to 3 Link monsters from your graveyard with different names to a monster you summon to the extra monster zone, which is similar to Sleepy Maiden. And so the basic idea with Battle Ocean is you're trying to have this thing power up and protect one of your stronger Link 4 monsters in the extra monster zone, which we'll talk about later. The other spell card we can search with Sea Angel is Marincess Dive, which is a hard once per turn effect to summon a non-Link Marincess monster either from your graveyard at any point or one from your deck if you already have Battle Ocean in play. Do note that Dive is yet another card that locks you into summoning water monsters, but again, if you just assume that that's most likely going to be the case unless you have a board that you are following up with, it's not really going to clash with the deck at all. The last Marincess card we chose to play is a copy of Marincess Wave, which says if you control a Marincess Link monster, effect Veiler or Imperm, one of your opponent's monsters, then if you control a Link 2 or higher Marincess on the field, all of your face-up monsters, even if they're not Marincess, are unaffected by your opponent's card effects until the end of the turn. This one-turn Mario Starman-esque Battle Ocean protection on all your monsters is a very powerful effect, and if you control a Link 3 or higher Marincess monster, you can activate this card from your hand, meaning you don't even have to set it, you can just play it just like Imperm. And wouldn't you know, we have a Link 3 monster called Marincess Coral Triangle in this extra deck, who does require Marincess monsters specifically, but she can send a water monster from your hand to the graveyard in order to fetch that Marincess trap card from your deck to your hand. That is a very powerful ability, and so it's worth playing the one copy of Wave. From what we've seen, some people seem to value playing Marincess Wave on the first turn and then eventually setting up Battle Ocean. Other people like doing it the other way around. We've generally tried to prioritize getting Battle Ocean out first because, let's be honest, it's fun having a 4,000 plus attack invincible monster, and either way, you're going to have a similar effect. Then to finish off the core of the deck, we like playing 3 copies of Signet Mining, which is basically Rhoda with an extra discard cost attached for any of these monsters besides Sleepy Maiden, who's level 5. And the cool thing with the discard cost is because you have Blue Slug able to recover a monster directly, and Sea Angel going for Dive to revive one from your grave, plus things like Mandarin just straight up coming from the grave on their own, you're actually able to leverage Signet Mining's discard cost to your advantage advantage, or at least reduce the impact of that discard cost. Before we jump into the other half of the deck, which is all tech cards anyway, I do want to finish off talking about the extra deck so that we'll have a better idea of why some of these tech cards are in here, especially with Droplet. After we make our Link 1 play, our Sea Angel will help us extend into a Link 2. We can of course go for Crystal Heart, which just needs any 2 water monsters. It itself is unaffected by your opponent's monster effects while it's in the extra monster zone, which helps you make Link plays with it without getting it removed by monsters. And then it has this weird battle effect that we've honestly never really used, but the whole point of this card is use this as the requirement for Battle Ocean, and it's very easy to summon with any 2 water monsters as its recipe. One of the reasons this card is so easy to combo despite Dive only summoning non-Link monsters is we have 2 copies of Marincess Coral Anemone. This card also requires any 2 water monsters to make, and says you can target any water monster with 1500 or less attack in your grave, which definitely allows 0 attack, and revive it to a zone this card points to, and then this of course also locks you into water monsters, which is the theme with a lot of these extra extender cards. Then Coral Anemone has an amazing secondary effect where if she's sent from the field to the graveyard for any reason, Link Summon, or she was equipped by Battle Ocean and something happens to her and she ends up in the graveyard, recycle any Marincess card from your graveyard except Anemone, which is very powerful for follow-up and recursion in case something goes wrong with your strategy. Each of these effects is also a hard once per turn, which you'd probably expect by now. Similarly, we have Splash Mage, who requires any 2 Cybers monsters, which basically is any 2 Marincess monsters in this deck, and you can go ahead and revive any Cybers monster in your graveyard in defense position, which means you can't bring back a Link monster, and you do negate the effects of the monster on the field as well. Plus, this one is unique in that it locks you into Cybers monsters specifically. So while Splash Mage does have a lot of freedom in a pure Marincess style build, you do want to keep in mind that depending on what other cards you like to play in your extra deck, you may not have as much access to them if you decide to go for Splash Mage. We've already talked a little bit about Marincess Coral Triangle, which is the only monster in the deck that requires specifically Marincess monsters to make. And in addition to searching for our trap card Marincess Wave, Coral Triangle has an ability that says if you have no monsters and your opponent does while this card is in your graveyard, you can banish her in order to special summon water Link monsters from your grave with a total Link rating of 3. This is a kind of de-Link effect that lets you recur all the materials, and then you can turn that into a different Link 3 or quite easily climb that into a Link 4 from that point. Both of Coral Triangle's effects lock you into waters, so you can kind of get the idea for why we're so restricted into waters. I don't know why I put Marbled Rock over here, but she is a Link 3 monster as well that needs any 2+ water monsters, has an effect that lets you recur any Marincess card from your graveyard just for free, and protect one of your Marincess monsters from battle by sending a Marincess card from hand to graveyard. Now we can finally talk about our Link 4 boss monsters, starting off with Marincess Aqua Argonaut, or as I've been instructed to call her, Mama. This Link 4 monster has an effect that synergizes very nicely with the Battle Ocean field spell. This monster's first effect makes her a Lightning Rod for attacks while she's in the extra monster zone, which synergizes quite nicely with Battle Ocean, who's going to make her unaffected by card effects potentially and make her a 4300 attack behemoth. And then she has 2 more effects which are both hard once per turns. Her second effect is you can target any water monster you control and 1 card your opponent controls and bounce them back to the hand. And her third effect is the ability to negate a spell or a trap card or effect that is activated on the field during your opponent's turn only. If you do this, you can special summon one of your Marincess monster cards that's equipped to this card, which is awesome because you can put Coral Anemone back into play on the field, and remember, if she's sent to the graveyard for any reason, you can go and recycle any Marincess card in your grave, which can even be a copy of Battle Ocean if that gets taken out, or any of the plethora of starters, extenders, or whatever else your Crystal Heart may desire. As if Mama weren't enough, we have another Link 4 called Marincess Great Bubble Reef, aka Auntie, and in some ways she's even more formidable than Argonaut. First, anytime a monster is banished face up, this card gains 600 attack for each of those monsters until the end of this turn. Not only does that trigger from something like Call by the Grave, but she also says during each player's standby phase, you can banish a water monster from your graveyard or face up field, probably the graveyard, to draw 1 card. Those 2 effects alone means she's going to become a 3200 attack without any kind of boost from Battle Ocean, then draw you a free card just for existing. Because that triggers every standby phase, that means by the time your turn rolls around again, your 600 boost from last turn will have worn off, but you can do it again during your turn, making her a 3200 attacker who's now drawn you 2 cards. And remember that if your opponent keeps banishing monsters face up for any reason, you gain 600 attack for each monster for that turn. So Auntie's a card you really don't want to mess with by banishing all her nieces and nephews. Finally, her third effect lets you send a water monster from your hand to grave as cost, which is very easy to fulfill with all the free draws, in order to special summon any of your banished Marincess monsters without targeting. This doesn't specify positions or stats, so you can summon any of your monsters, including the Link 2s, Link 3, Link 4, whatever you may have sent to the Shadow Realm. With all the Marincess cards covered, it's time to take a look at the tech in the main and extra deck, and we're starting off with 3 copies of Forbidden Droplet. Yes, you can go ahead and play something like Dark Ruler No More, but we especially like the fact that Droplet has a fun interaction with the free cards you get off of Battle Ocean. If you check the text of Droplet, it says your opponent cannot respond to this card with cards of the same original type monster, spell, or trap as the card sent. And if you send an equipped Link monster, its original type was Link Monster, and so this card lets you turn all of those free equips off of Battle Ocean and Sleepy Maiden into actual ammo for disrupting your opponent's plays. Combine that with the fact that, like Cynet Mining, you can afford to send some of your Marincess monsters to the graveyard because they'll have effects or you'll be able to recover them so easily, and Forbidden Droplet just becomes a much more high power ceiling card than something simpler like Dark Ruler No More. To further help your deck going second, because let's be honest, it's great when you're able to go first and you set up a Towers monster, but a little harder to go second, you can play something like Triple Tactics Talent, especially in Master Duel where it's rampant with hand traps called Max C and counters to Max C. This section here doesn't really need too much of an explanation other than they are good on their own, and these cards specifically also counter Max C. Cross-Eyed Designator can also be played for a similar reason, but it can also help protect your combo lines from other cards as well, so just keep that in mind. Infinite Impermanence is just one of the most flexible hand traps there is, even if you already have a Wave, which is arguably better in this deck. And the last 3 cards here are Cosmic Cyclone and Harpy's Feather Duster, just because in Master Duel's Best of 1 format, you really want some way to deal with Runic, Labyrinth, Eldritch, and all those other back row of Floodgate kind of decks. The last 3 cards in the extra deck are Abyss Dweller, because it's a very strong card in general, and it's extra powerful when you use water monsters. Number 4, Stealth Kraken, which basically turns all your opponent's monsters into water as well, and then lets you pop one of them as a quick effect once per turn, which then does burn damage to your opponent equal to half of the attack it had on the field. And the last slot is kind of awkward. We originally were just playing Bahamut Shark, and totally awesome here, but of course Toad recently got devoured for New Year's after becoming a mate and we can no longer play it. And so Lingaribo is a temporary fill-in for that spot where you can turn any of your extra Cybers extenders into a card that hampers trap decks. Finally, here's 15 example cards that may get the gears turning for how you may want to customize this deck, and I've broken them down into a few categories including extra deck, hand traps, consistency, going second, and floodgates. The first thing with the extra deck is it's important to remember that a lot of your plays lock you out of non-water monsters, so things like Zeus, Access Code Talker, and Transcode Talker aren't necessarily the easiest things to play. That said, they are quite easy to accommodate as follow-up plays once you've already had a board and survived, so whether or not you think it's worth playing them will depend on if you can survive and maintain enough of a board presence so that these cards can actually be played in your follow-up turn. I personally don't think Stealth Kraken Spawn is that reliable since it has to be destroyed for it to float back into your other monster, and realistically other than that, it's just a glorified way to summon out Zeus if you can actually afford to play multiple copies of this card, which I wouldn't want to do. Again, Zeus is strong, as is Access Code Talker, but it's a little hard to bring these guys out, so you just won't be seeing them every game, especially if it closes out in just a turn or two. Area is a card that I think was much better when Halqifibrax was everywhere, allowing you to salvage it for free from your opponent's graveyard, but right now, it's again going to be a card where, will you even get use out of it every game? Probably not. And Transcode Talker's here because although it's an Earth monster, it does fit with the general idea of revive Cybers monsters from your graveyard, and it serves as a representative of the possible hybrid decks you can build with Marincess, such as with Mathmech. The next category is hand traps, because as you can kind of see, the second half of this deck is basically whatever tech cards you'd like to fit, and as this deck is basically a one-card combo deck, you can afford to play whatever hand traps you'd like. The first one I want to highlight is Nibiru, which is something that we sometimes see in Marincess decks, but it's important to remember that Battle Ocean only protects you from your opponent's cards, so Nibiru would wipe your own board if you've already established your Invincible Mama. Droll Lockbird gets a mention because in Master Duel specifically, Max C is a big problem for a combo deck like this, and this lets you stop Max C after your opponent draws one card off of it. They can no longer draw any more cards with Max C for the turn. And Ghost Spell and Haunted Mansion is kind of cool in that in addition to being a disruption for your opponent, you can use it to protect your own combo pieces from your opponent's disruption so that you can make your main plays as intended. The third category I have here is just consistency, which is simply represented by Pot of Desires. This is a card you could play if you decide to tweak the amounts of different garnets you have in the deck, or maybe sequence things so that Desires isn't the first thing you play and more of an extender later on. This is definitely something you can do with or without, because if it ends up being an extender, as it often is in this deck, you could go ahead and use something like Triple Tactics Talent instead, which is why this is here. Though it is important to note that even if Desires can banish your one-ofs, they're generally not required for your deck to function at a fundamental level, and it's sometimes required to play a Hail Mary card to help you get something like a back row removal card in Master Duel's Best of One format, so you can fight off floodgates. The fourth category is going second cards. We've already mentioned Dark Ruler no more, but the general idea is this card's a lot cheaper to play than something like Forbidden Droplet, which could be seen as a bit more of a win more card. And because this deck is generally trying to set up an invincible monster through Battle Ocean, oftentimes it's not the biggest problem if your opponent has some things left on their board if your monster is just invincible and unaffected by those cards. Gamma is the water kaiju, so you can summon it in this deck even if you've been locked into that attribute. And Evenly Matched could realistically be any other thing like Lightning Storm, Raigeki, whatever else fits the bill as something that helps you going second in breaking your opponent's established board. The fifth and final category is floodgates, which I know I said before, I still hate floodgates, but these deserve a special mention. The first I want to mention is Gozen Match and also Rivalry of Warlords, neither of which hurt this deck at all. You can play either of these ones depending on which one impacts your metagame the most, or, raw forbid, go ahead and play both of these things in this strategy. Then Imperial Iron Wall and Anti-Spell Fragrance I like grouping together here for ideas because in addition to hampering your opponent, they have effects that actively benefit your deck as it tries to play, much like Droll Lockbird. By preventing cards from banishing you, we can already get the benefit of something like Ghostbell and Haunted Mansion in protecting yourself from something like Called by the Grave, and the fact that neither player can banish cards means you can also go and have Mandarin turn after turn come back from the graveyard because it will never banish itself as long as your trap remains in play. I must admit, in spite of myself, that I do kind of like Anti-Spell in this deck because after monster effects, the most common way to out this is by chaining a quick play spell, and when you play this thing as a lightning rod for your opponent's removal, it makes it that much safer for your Battle Ocean, who is making your Link 4 monster invincible to all their other cards. Again, you don't necessarily have to play these floodgates or really any of these other cards, or even this deck as it was built for today's sample, but hopefully this will provide a starting point if you decide to play around with Marincess.
That's it for now, but feel free to grab one of these videos on your way out. If you really enjoyed what you saw today, remember to subscribe to JD Gaming for more Yu-Gi-Oh videos. Thanks guys, this is JD Gaming, hope you guys enjoyed as always, and I'll see you guys next time.